maybe I might know a little bit about that, but okay. So it's the idea that we should be grateful for the little bit that we get, and then the idea that everybody's story, if you're a person of color, is exactly the same, and that's not the case. Your story is not my story.
Exactly. It's like when you go in and you see these things, it's like, okay, there we go. We have a certain amount of people that we need to satisfy. So that's why we go ahead and we have that token in. The most recent comic I read was The Pro by Garth Ennis. And I'm so glad you guys know. Amazing. It's about a prostitute that gets superpowers. Yeah. You need it in your life. It's a great book. If you haven't read it, it's a great book. But what they do is that when they go ahead and she gets her superpowers.
The Pro.
The Pro, exactly. She gets her, like, prostitute. She goes ahead and she gets her superpowers. And she joins this kind of, like, beta Justice League. Everyone else speaks perfect English except for the one black dude that's sitting in the back and the entire time jiving and talking and very, I'm trying to be nice. In a very stereotypical way. I was like, I'm not gonna lie, I was pissed off for a little bit, but that does speak to how a lot of times when you have that token black character, they immediately go back to those stereotypes just to try and make you feel, hey, this is the norm, this is how you act, this is how you should be acting. Mm-hmm. And that's just a trouble.
No. So, one of the things that we wanted to talk about as a solution, one of the things that I personally noticed, and Armand and I kind of are valiant fangirls of the biggest kind, fangirl, boy, the independents seem to be where we're being represented. Mm-hmm. Which is one of those situations where we have to speak with our dollar. Valiant, Image, Boom, they have been making a concerted effort to talk about us and to put people, not just people of color on the page, and not just women on the page, and not just LGBT on the page, but to also, I shall pass.
Yeah, there is nothing more powerful in this world than an Apple charging cord.
But also to have those people behind the scenes. Now, I will say this. DC announced at their panel, was it Friday? Was it Friday?
Yep.
That they're going to be making a concerted effort in the next 5 years to have more people of color, not just in the book, but behind the scenes. And that's something that we have to go out and support. They're making a concerted effort to have more women, to have more LGBT, because while Bendis writes a great Miles Morales, there are areas that he just can't write from. He just can't. He doesn't know what it is to be a young black kid. He can try, and the effort is appreciated, but one of the things we keep telling you, Octavia Butler is not dead. There are women and people of color writers out there that the comic companies could be asking to write, who write sci-fi. Go ahead, go.
No, perfect case in point. I mean, how many of you are reading Black Panther? Okay, for those of you who are reading it, you know Road to Wakanda is coming out this fall, right?
Yeah.
And so we're going to get Yonda Garvey. There's one, the poet, I can't remember her name. Thank you. No, I mean, I think, I think we're definitely on the path of, I think the diversity and inclusion in pop culture, it comes in phases. Like, first it was tokens. Mm-hmm. Then you go from tokens to you have supporting casts that occasionally do something useful. You go from supporting cast to sidekicks to having legacy characters, which is kind of where we're at now, where it's, look, I mean, diversity as it stands right now traditionally veers towards black people and women. That's like kind of like the general line. So it's Jane Foster's Thor, diversity. Miles Morales, okay, so it's a black kid now. Black Hispanic, which I will say to the degree in which that's rarely fully articulated.
No, it's not.
I mean, to the degree in which it's Miles, and then once in the blue moon, it's
Morales. By the way.
So no, I do think as far as the indies and everything else is concerned, it is the question of when will the characters reflect not just visually, but from a background and sensibility standpoint, the communities they come from. Why I say we're not there yet is Nighthawk, because Nighthawk obviously got canceled. I think everyone knows that. And in terms of it being a book that touched touched upon the issues that are currently affecting the African American community. If it's a book about a superhero who's beating up corrupt police officers, it's pretty much, you know, right in front of your face. And it survived long enough where we might get one trade out of that.
Maybe.
Maybe. And you can, I mean, I know for those of you who read Bleeding Cool, and I do, because who doesn't like a good comic book tabloid, you know, you can debate the degree in which it got sandwiched in between Rebirth and Civil War, or you can just say honestly, I don't know that we're at the point as a country where we're really prepared to have comic books and pop culture that really speak to those communities. Because look, you know, I read Bad Feminist. I'm a guy. All of that book was not meant for me. Some of it for me is educational. It is. I know nothing about being a woman. I know nothing about being a woman of color. So 75% of that book is me learning. And most people like entertainment to be able to fall asleep and to zone out. Mm-hmm. And to be able to have stories from diverse communities means that when you're reading something, you are really actually learning. And for comic books, you almost call that noir. Mm-hmm. Because Ed Brubaker and indies are when people are like, oh, I want to read the Fade Out so I can understand about McCarthyism. We're not, I think, as a culture at that point now where it's like, oh, I would like to learn about what it was like to pass as a person of color in the 1920s. I'll read Incognito, which was an exceptional Vertigo book. Yeah. Or I'd read about Arab in the Future. Or reading anything done by Joe Sacco, where Joe Sacco, I think, takes comic books and drives it to a point where social commentary and the importance of really spending time in the community to understand their stories, to be able to explore them fully, those are not mainstream books. Those are, you know,
independent. Right.
It's word of a friend. It's like the way a good book or a good movie travels. Like most people didn't like see Clockwork Orange because Rotten Tomatoes gave it a phenomenal rating. You had a friend who told you it was absolutely stunning. And I think that's how diversity stories get passed. But that's of course my uninformed opinion.
One of the difficulties, and Art will get to your question in a minute, but let me make one more point. One of the difficulties you're dealing with the big two, Marvel and DC, is that the comics industry and the comic fan base are two things that create a lot of inertia. The comics industry is very conservative, and it's very personal. When I say conservative, I don't mean politically voting for Donald Trump. Conservative just means slow to change.
Yes.
Okay? And personal means that people have wrapped these characters into themselves as part of our childhoods. We've grown up with a certain image of how things should be, and when you change that, you know, it's cats and dogs living together. Okay? So probably one of the best examples of the comics industry going crazy over diversity was the Black Wally West that they introduced, 4 or 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. So New 52 came along and they wiped out everything that we loved for about 25 years, and they started to rebuild it, and DC wanted to get back to basics. I understand what they were doing, and they introduced a Black Wally, and everyone is, oh my gosh, you've raped my childhood. Wally West is a fictional character. It should not matter. However, the fandom took it very personally. Okay, they said, my Wally West is a redhead who is Barry Allen's nephew, who is married to Linda Park with 2 children. This guy, I don't know who this is. You are inventing tokenism. I don't think that's. I think that's the wrong answer. But the personal brings out the crazy in people. Okay, they really love the classic Wally West, and to change that was a fundamental attack on how they viewed their fandom. Mm-hmm. I think that's taking it too far, but that's where this comes from. Is they like things to be the way they are. If you're going to have change in comics, I really feel like it needs to be organic. It needs to be a slow process that people can adjust to. I think one of the great success stories in comics is the Black Nick Fury. And I mean, movie Sam Jackson, Black Nick Fury.
The difference between the movie and the comic. Right?
Yeah, let's
not
go over
it.
But movie Nick Fury, played by Sam Jackson, was introduced in The Ultimates. Yeah. And there was an alternate universe version where Mark Millar was running crazy with ideas, and I think people were like, okay, that's kind of cool. He's not the real Nick Fury, but that's kind of cool that you did that. And then the people were used to Ultimate Nick Fury, and then they actually turned that into the movie version, and people were like, okay, that's cool, because it's from the comic.
Right.
Then they put him into the comic books, and that is the magical when diversity goes wrong.
They put him into the regular Marvel universe, right. And the way they did it was so stupid. It was, regular Nick Fury has had a son this whole time we've never heard of, and he was a sergeant in the army, and then one day he got stabbed in the eye and discovered he had superpowers, and now he's an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., and everyone's like,
and he's Nick Fury Jr. And it was the most random thing.
It made no sense.
Well, it made sense to the extent that they were trying to match the movies. They wanted people walking off the street into a comic shop to see a Nick Fury who looked like the guy from the movies. From a financial standpoint, it made sense. From a storytelling standpoint, it was ass.
Well, that goes to the thing. With writing, I don't care about me. I can write crap myself. I'm paying you to write good stuff about me. So if you're going to write it, write good stories. Art, what were you going to say?
A couple things. It's interesting to observe in this. This isn't a comic book. This is a movie, but that George Takei was opposed to the gay Sulu.
Yes.
Because he felt that it didn't match the way the character had developed.
Right.
And that's really important because here's a guy who everyone knows how he feels about putting gay characters out there. But he himself brought up the fact that, in this, all these tweets he had between him and Simon Pegg that the whole world read.
Yeah.
If you haven't read it, that's an amazing conversation. Because these two guys agree on what the goal is.
Yeah. But how to
But
get
neither
there.
one of them is exactly sure of how to get there.
Yeah.
Right.
And they both admit that. It's very constructive conversation they had.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that goes to the other thing, having a constructive conversation.
Right.
Now the flip side.
So, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
The other thing, when you were talking about the independent comics, if you want to see real diversity, go to webcomics.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, we were going
Webcomics are the place where diversity is completely total. The problem with webcomics is that there's no grading system. You don't know when you click on it whether it's going to be really amazing
or just crap.
or whether it's crap.
Yeah.
But then that's back to Armand talking about the word of mouth.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'd like to jump in as far as a fan, and this is less about independent comics, really just more about being a vocal fan. I mean, we're all here at a Comic-Con,
Right.
so I would argue that we're probably among the most vocal and enthusiastic of fans. But I look back and I wrote an article recently about Poe Dameron, and I went to see the movies with my wife and friends. Went to see The Force Awakens, and I think any of us in the room have had to identify with a character that we loved in our hearts but didn't represent us.
Mm-hmm.
Probably as a default for not being represented at all. My favorite franchise is Star Wars, and I remember growing up as a kid, and you're playing Star Wars, and basically everyone would just be like, "You're the dark-haired guy, so you're the dark-haired character."
Yeah.
Which in Star Wars wasn't such a bad thing because Han Solo. But I was like, no, I like Luke. Luke is whiny, but he's also noble, and he's also and whiny, and he's noble and he's good, and it's his journey, and he grows, and he has this like fierce sense of what's right even when he's wrong, and that was who I identified with, with my Lego X-Wing fighter that I made, skimming around, running around as a kid in the neighborhood with him. That was my guy. That was Luke. And you couldn't have just tokened in a Hispanic character or put an actor who looked more like me in the movies and had me identify with them if all he is a token, if all he is, if he's not Luke.
Right.
And then I went to see The Force Awakens. We walked out, and I love I love Finn, and I loved Rey. And everybody's like, "Oh, she's Mary Sue." Yeah, but she's still awesome. Like, Rey is just awesome, and that's just how it is. And I feel sad when she's sad. But I walked out, and despite my love for every other character, including the hate between Hux and Kylo Ren, I turned to my wife and I said, I really like Poe Dameron is awesome. And she's like, yeah, because he's the only Gen X character in this movie full of millennials and aging baby boomers in space. Okay, that's true.
I'm an old man, shut up.
Right. But then it kind of emotional. I was just like, he looked like me, but he didn't have any of the stereotypes that are baggage for a lot of the movies and things that are set in the United States or in modern society. This is space. There's no space tacos. There's no galactic quinceañera. There's no whatever. And I almost started to cry because I was just like that. He's my Luke now. That's my guy. I look at him that's Poe. And I get the little Lego action figure and then just a whole bunch of Poe art. That's my guy. And I have to celebrate that everywhere I go and everyone I talk to about, because that's somebody who not only do I identify with, it's because he's a Luke. He's good from the beginning, and he's on board this whole rebellion or this whole thing from the beginning. He doesn't need to be changed. He's not like an anti-hero that becomes a hero like Han Solo. He's a Luke, but he's a Luke that reminds me of me.
Yeah.
And my bad. I wanted to say one thing, I guess, kind of in agreement with you, and wanted to kind of rebut one other thing. I don't think diversity can come gradually, and the reason why. Does anybody remember Milestone Comics?
Yeah. Of course.
Okay.
Anybody knows Static Shock?
Right.
Who knows that? Who thinks Static should have had a movie like that?
So perfect example. Milestone. I'm old-ish.
You're not that old.
I'm
You're old, that makes me old.
Okay, we're oldish. Milestone came out when I was in middle school, so a lot of those characters, like you talk about a character like Hardware, where it's a battle between an inventor and a corporation who stole his idea, but a larger argument in regards to cultural and creative theft. I mean, you can run down the entire Milestone line and find characters that are more relevant now than they probably were when they were originally created. But things have gotten so politically sensitive that those characters, you can't even find most of that stuff in trades. I buy those back issues on eBay.
Yeah.
So to think, we had that jump, and then we're kind of like in pause. We had Isaiah Bradley as a Patriot from Young Avengers, but nobody wants to go back and talk about the story that he really started out of, which was Captain America Truth, which was really Marvel starting to play with the idea of
the Tuskegee experiments.
Right, in
Yeah.
terms of experimenting on African Americans with syphilis. And so it was the story of how the superhero serum had been experimented on African Americans, and Isaiah Bradley's grandfather had been part of that.
Yeah.
So, diversity, I think.
How many of you even knew that? More than I thought. I'm pleasantly surprised, more than I thought. But a lot of people didn't know that Marvel actually addressed the Tuskegee experiments, because I feel like in some ways we've gone backwards.
But we're scared. I feel like watching, Nick at Night or classic TV shows, and you see shows like, All in the Family, and shows that just
It's a brilliant show.
that had conversations about
Yeah.
them. And it's almost like, even though we say, PC is that horrible word, that label gets thrown on things, but I feel like there's a fear, whatever you want to label it, there's a fear now to talk about things that people weren't afraid to talk about. And maybe that's one of our biggest responsibilities now, is to not be afraid to have those conversations that for some reason in the 70s, in that little golden nugget of time, people just put out there, and you have to deal with it one way or another.
I saw two questions. Wait a minute. Go ahead, Harry, but then I saw two questions.
Because I want to get him, and then I want to get her, both of them have their hands up. But one of the main things I really wanted to address is when it comes to topics of diversity, especially when it comes to comic books, it seems like, especially with the online community, one thing that I always run into is you always have that certain segment of people that say, don't change my comic books. If this changes, I don't want to read no more. This isn't what I grew up on. Or this isn't like what I remember. Well, guess what? If you go back through the entire history of comic book, that is the only constant, is change.
Yeah.
It is always. Comic books have always been about gimmicks. Superman was your first huge gimmick. When Action Comics came out in 1939, that was the gimmick that changed the face of comic books. Everything else that kind of came afterwards, it's like everything that's come across has been something that keeps readers reading, because I guarantee you, if you go back and you read something that you remember from 10 or 15 years ago, you're going to be like, oh, how did I read this? Because it's not what you're reading now.
Mm-hmm.
Case in point, when Secret Wars came out last year, I went back and I read the original. Oh my gosh, the dialogue
Yeah.
from the original. And I said, I can't believe I liked this back in the 80s, but it was what it was. Comic books have to change. And the crazy part, there's certain things that won't change. Batman won't get old.
No.
We can sit back and wonder how long it will be before Superman's son, which is available. Actually, both Superman and Batman's son, how long that will be before they take over. Because granted, something will come along, those universes will reset, and both Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne will still be in their 20s and 30s. And meanwhile, all the rest of the heroes will still kind of grow up around them like Nightwing's a grown man.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's happening.
Yeah.
Nightwing's 43 and Batman's 46.
Still like 42.
But the bottom line of what
Lazarus Pit.
But the bottom line of what I'm trying to say is, if you're going to be a fan of this medium, you have to be open to change.
Yeah.
Let me get his question, and then once we answer his question,
And I
let's
had
get
two
hers.
over
They
here
both
as well.
looking for me.
It wasn't so much a question, I just wanted to share the Asian American perspective in this. But
Yes.
he was talking about how a lot of Latino characters in film are played by Caucasian characters. Asian characters that are adapted from books and comic books and made into film, the Asian character simply just ceases to exist.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
like Doctor Strange,
That was
on
on the list.
A lot of people don't realize this, but Starship Troopers, the lead character Rico, was
Yes.
Filipino.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know,
And they
in
turned
Aloha
him
and
into Yeah.
Wrath of Khan. Khan is South Asian.
Yes.
Right?
If I can tag on to you, one of the interesting things I might find about the Asian
Hero
stuff.
6, yes.
Yes. One of the interesting things about the Asian stuff is I think people, especially Westerners, have a tendency to just lump Asia into one big category.
Right.
The controversy with
things.
Marvel is launching an Iron Fist series coming up. And one of the controversies of that is that Danny Rand has always been a white man, and people said, well, why don't we make him into an Asian character for the series? And one of the things that kind of troubled me about that comment, I get where it's coming from, is that Asia is a very broad area, stretching from China to Afghanistan to the Maori regions down in by Australia, and the Hawaiians. You know, that's all Asia, but it's such a diverse range. And I think people had this kind of notion of, oh, we can make him into a traditional kung fu, you know, mystical warrior, and it's like, no, that is a very, if that even exists, that is a very small segment of Asia you're representing there, and I don't think the Japanese experience is the same as the Chinese experience, is the same as the Korean, is the same as the Afghani, and so forth. Please continue.
So that's my point. But my second point is that the Asian American culturally are just very passive aggressive, and if whenever you see this whitewashing going on Asian American media everywhere, they complain about Hollywood whitewashing us again and again and again. You know, a lot of years ago when Miss Saigon came out, a lot of the actors were not Asian. You know, but I mean, I'm coming from the attitude that, you know what, we make our own media. We have the resources.
Yes.
I mean, I hear you guys, yes, it'd be nice if DC came around eventually and represented us much, but we have the
have to make
resources
our
now,
own.
we have